All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. We are here with the one and only Benjamin George, which makes it George and George. Double dose over here for everybody. I hope everybody's having a great day. Hope the birds are singing. The wind is at your back. And we're going to talk about Benjamin's new book, No Absolutes. I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about life and where we are and what we're doing and how to maybe see it better and make it better. Benjamin, what you got to open up with us today?
Oh, I've had a whirlwind of a week, so where to begin? Not to mention the world's had a whirlwind of a week too.
Yeah.
Um, well, here's an interesting place to start.
Nice.
Kind of tapering off or back into our conversation before, about alignments of uh, people and groups and processes and all of these things. I had a family member have a heart attack this week.
I'm sorry.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it. She's doing okay. Um, but it was really interesting because here you have this whole traumatic thing, and then she's through it, gets the angioplasties and whatnot, and then the prescriptions come along, and she was, and this is an older person in my family. She's given a essentially a trial drug that has only been on the market for less than 6 months,
Hmm.
with the instructions of, if it causes you shortness of breath or it doesn't allow you to sleep, let us know. And of course it did, and she's off of it now. But it was really interesting that, somebody who just had a very, very dramatic, almost life ending experience gets put on a test, essentially. I mean, I'm sure it's approved. It had to be approved, but at the same
Maybe.
time, if you're, well, maybe at the same time, if the caveat is, let us know if you're having symptoms that would be, very much things that you don't want if you just had a heart problem. And it got me to thinking about what we were talking about, is just, all of these things that are happening in the world. When y- on the surface it said one thing or another thing, it's really important to understand the motivations, the perspectives, the who's moving those chess pieces behind the scene, and for what reason. Um, Otherwise, you end up in situations like this where essentially you're running a human experiment on somebody who just had a brush with mortality. To me, that seems just questionably unethical, personally.
Yeah, I couldn't agree anymore. Recently, I watched it was a conference of sorts, and it was at the Milken Institute, and it was five, six, or seven, or a handful of these top. There was like a pharmacist, a surgeon, a multitude of different doctors representing different areas. And one of
Hmm.
the things they were discussing was the future of medicine. And they discussed something very similar to what you're talking about. They were saying that one of the problems with medicine is that it moves way too slow. We have all these things that could potentially help people. And, we can't even move a drug forward unless we have 10 years of research and regulations. And one guy's
Hmm.
like, yeah, that's for a reason, because it's
Absolutely.
unethical to move forward. I mean, we all remember the Nuremberg trials where the doctors were just experimenting on people nilly-willy. But
Hmm.
that was one guy said that, but the other guy seemed to be on the other side of the fence. And this is all speculation. However, it seems to me that somewhere along the line, modern medicine has made a choice that we need to move faster. And we have an aging demographic full of people. A lot of people are going to die anyway. They have these diseases. We should be trying new things if we get their informed consent. And,
Hmm.
the idea of informed consent to some doctors is like, you want to try this thing? Here you go. They don't tell you
Right.
all these things, because what's the difference between an effect and a side effect? The same thing, man. This drug
Hmm.
does not have a side effect. It has all these effects. It might cure your runny nose, but it also give you diarrhea. Those are the same. They're effects. They're not side effects. That's just a
Right.
tricky way of dressing it down, man. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think she was experimented on.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because the whole idea behind that is, on the surface it looks like, yeah, we're medicine's moving too slow, so we're trying to be better for this generation of people. On the other side, why would a doctor prescribe this trial medication or this new medication? Why? Because there's a profit behind it.
Yeah.
Because there's an incentive structure behind that.
Yeah.
And these incentive structures, I mean, it's a dangerous game to put in, monetary incentives, especially in conjunction with someone's health. And it's not like you mentioned Nuremberg, but we also have more modern things. How many times have these companies been ordered to pay billions of dollars in damages
Yep.
because they did not disclose, or they didn't do a proper trial, or what have you. There's so many mechanisms of fault at play here. And when you have these, I like to talk to myself in game theory terms, right? You have a player. If that player is going to be a reasonable, responsible player, they have a certain series of choices that they're going to make when encountered with different environments, different needs, different problems. If you have selfish players and greedy players, they're going to make a different set of choices. Well, when you align profit centers with health, you end up with a whole lot of greedy players, unfortunately. Despite the Hippocratic oaths and all of this stuff, at the end of the day, it's still aligned with greedy players, which means the choices that are made by those people, those companies, those institutions, they're going to be a broad spectrum of choices that not necessarily benefit the end user, but they definitely benefit the shareholders, the profit centers, and so on. And it's a dangerous game.
It is. It's almost like the end user, the patient, has been almost factored out of the decision making at all. It's that, okay, this one will make this much, this will make this much. And especially when you think about the players being, if we dub Pfizer a major player, how
Hmm.
many of Pfizer's executives have been on the board of the FDA? It's like a revolving door right there.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, and it's not just the FDA; it's health in all countries.
Yeah.
The CDCs, the WHO's, and you look at the board of directors, or who's the executives, and yeah, it's all of those same people. It's and that should cause concern for anybody. The regulatory body and the people who are supposed to be regulating shouldn't. I mean, there's a reason that it's called a conflict of interest, because it's specifically a very big conflict of interest. Yet, when there's huge amounts of money to be made, and this kind of tails into the end user not being factored in the equation, is because, well, they kind of are, but it's a volume number,
Right.
right? There's just so many people and so much volume that, yeah, we know we're going to sell 2 million of these if we push it through our gynecologists, or our general practitioners, or whatever, for whatever drug it may be. And that kind of structure, combined with we're going to just have an open door relationship with the FDAs and the NIHs and the WHO's and the CDCs of the world, and those people are going to come in and make a big profit, which is all kind of public record, or at least a good chunk of it's public record, and you can see how much money these people have been making. uh, that's, in a game theory perspective, that's a very, very poor alignment of interests if you're the end user.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
if you're one of those executives, you're doing pretty well in that game situation. But my question would be is, should we allow something like
The answer to your question is no.
that?
I think. But how 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 do you change that?
So
That
this is a long-term game, and I think one of the huge issues of just facing the world at large is, if it's not an immediate fix, if, it's not just a Band-Aid that makes the boo-boo go away. Um, People don't have the time. They don't have they don't have the resources to comprehend the information, to have the conversations, and or the will to see them through, because everything's on such a quick cycle when it comes to, politics and how all this stuff is kind of regulated in our society, that if it's not a quick fix, if it's not a headline, if it's not a campaign promise that can be uttered in a sentence or two, then there's just not a lot of public will for these things. Now, if you talk to people individually, most people are really upset with things like this, and they would tend to agree that these sort of incentive structures are, at best problematic. um, but fixing something like this is going to be a long-term thing. The obvious solution to me at the start is you need to devolve profit from health.
Yeah.
Health shouldn't be a for-profit business, nor should communications, for that matter. Having people who are making massive profits off of networks that are just putting out propagandas, or sometimes facts, sometimes not, those sort of things, is a similar problem with incentive structures and what that information is supposed to be doing for the populace. It used to be Walter Cronkite. Everybody trusted the guy because he
Yep.
spoke the news, right? Well, now all of a sudden, if you were to poll people and say, do you trust X on X network, you're going to get a whole lot of no. and and I think we're seeing that, right? People are tuning in the podcast much more often. You have all these independent networks kind of popping up from YouTube channels and whatnot. And so that one's kind of hammering itself out because there's a free market component there that isn't completely held down and regulated and whatnot. Now, we've seen that free market be impacted, especially over the past few years, by censorship.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about the health aspect of things, there is no free market component there to kind of balance the equation out. That's all bought and paid for game. And so divesting those profit centers, and I think there's a way to do it. I don't think there's a perfect way to do it within the confines of the structure of society. We have a nonprofit status, and you can have a nonprofit business that would direct more, and be more of an open source type thing, open accountability. You could even tie blockchain into it to make sure that there wasn't a human being accountable for accountability. It was just a program. So there's ways that you could kind of break this apart, but at the end of the day, who's paying for all of the rules and regulations that are making that whole market able to do what it's doing? They're paying, through lobbying groups and whatnot. You have all of this. It's bought and paid for game. So what's the solution? One that's probably not going to be taken, simply because the money to be made is far outweighs the value that one would get, which is a sad state of affairs. And I think we see that in just about most industries across the board at this stage.
Yeah, that's well said. I couldn't agree more. I see the same situation, the same red thread runs through so many of our organization. And to me, it's the fact that people have become numbers rather than human beings.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a CEO or you're a board of director and you're sitting in some boardroom somewhere, you look at, oh, well, employee 017222 is not performing. They're not productive. But they don't understand that this employee's kid just died. All they see is numbers not working. And they don't even use they don't even measure all the variables. They only have a small set of variables they measure. One's profitable, one's productivity, one is shelf life. They have this inadequate equation to measure success, and they have completely failed to measure the human component. And when you do that, you strip humanity out of everything. I heard a good quote once that said, as humans, we need rules, and we need, if we don't have rules, we become animals. But if we don't have freedom, then we become numbers or robots. And so we need a little mix of both. But it seems that we've gone way overboard into this idea that we're ones and zeros. And like, I think you're seeing it play out through humanity. You're seeing people rising up. You're seeing people go and kill people because they're not ones and twos. There's no humanity. And sometimes I think maybe it's because we're too big. Is this what happens when it gets so big that the only way you can measure stuff is by stripping the humanity out and looking at them like numbers? What?
That's an interesting point. I think too big is definitely part of it, but I think the other part of that sentence would be too big for the system that we've created.
Mm.
When we did this whole westernized democracy / republic movement, the concept was to decentralize power, right? That was kind of the underlying reason that we have a Congress and we have an executive branch and a judicial branch, is to decentralize power. And that was in the context of the available technology of the time, which was, telegraphs, maybe at that point, maybe not, but more than likely, just old-fashioned mail systems, word of mouth type stuff. And in order to encompass everybody, you had to have a certain system that kind of worked for that time and environment. Well, we're in a very different world now.
Yeah.
You were able to all have a conversation. We're able to share information instantaneously around the globe. To me, it seems that we could create a system that would work for greater amounts of people. Again, the problem is the people who have the authority in the world to create said system are incentivized against creating a system like that because it would remove value from their pocketbook. I mean,
Yeah.
Nancy Pelosi's making a killing on the stock market.
She's crushing.
She's crushing. It's wild.
Benjamin, okay, I have an idea that I'm gonna throw this out at you, and it's a provocative idea. And so this is an idea that I think could fundamentally save the United States. Now, it's not, and this idea could be applied to other countries, could implement this idea. And feel free to tear this thing down as much as you want. Okay, I got 2 words for you: National Socialism. So imagine the United States. How we just cut like $15 billion to Ukraine or to NATO for God knows what, for what sort of NGO we gave that to or whatever. What if we just created the United States? Like, the left hates nationalism, the right hates socialism, but you know what everybody hates? National socialism. Like, if you're a national socialist, then you're a Nazi. But it just seems to me like what's the real problem with that? The real problem with that is that it cuts into the internationalism of the world. And you could make the argument, and I guess I should try to make the argument first of all, I'm not a Nazi, everybody. I'm just throwing this out as a provocative idea. But, if you look at kind of what happened in World War II on the financial level, what you saw was the end of the Germans trying to be like, hey, we want to keep all our money here. And you saw a lot of bankers coming and be like, no, you're not doing that. The same thing could be said here. Like, we could provide, I think we already have a sort of socialism for the people on the very top, whether it's the pharmaceutical companies, the insurance companies, the banking industry. These guys are borrowing money from the Fed at nothing and then parking it at the Fed and then taking interest on it. And they don't even lend it out. Why not? And then those same people are like, this doesn't work. Well, it works for you guys. Why wouldn't it work for us? I'm not, on some level, I understand the drawbacks to giving people free money. I get that. But is it possible that there could be some form of national socialism that would cure the evils that are happening to the people in our country? What do you think?
Well, I would say cure the evils is a heavy load. Um,
I agree.
that one's a big uphill. Now, I kind of think what you're getting at is kind of like the idea of a universal basic income. That's kind of
Let me
been
push back real
okay.
fast because I don't necessarily need it to be a income for everybody.
Okay.
How can I change it to a freedom dividend? Would that make a difference if it was a freedom dividend versus an income for people?
I think
That says that you earn it, because I think we've put into it. Like if you've spent your life giving into something, shouldn't you get something back?
well, I mean, that was kind of the idea behind Social Security.
Right.
Well, I'm sorry, that wasn't the original idea behind Social Security, but then it became the idea behind Social Security. Um, after, because for a while it was the pensions that kind of did that. You
Yeah.
invested yourself into
Yeah.
a company, and then the company took care of you. And that was a really good relationship for the people who got to take advantage of that. The 90s rolled around, and there's not too many more pension funds ever
Right.
since then. Uh, you know, I would say there's a really interesting conversation happening right now, because you do have a lot of displaced people. You have a lot of automation and artificial intelligence are going to devastate blue and white collar jobs, as they rapidly progress here in the next 10 years or so. You have a whole dysmorphia of how people used to live versus how they're living now and how they think they should live. And there's so many nuances and facets to this, right? But one of the things that in reflecting on that for quite a few years, I found myself leading a path of a universal standard of living.
I like it.
So instead of, equality of outcome, you have equality of opportunity. And that's what you strive to create.
Right.
Because equality of outcome is sensitive.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to work harder than somebody else. That's
We're not
just going
equal.
to happen. Yeah.
Right.
But if you give the equality of opportunity, so that would mean, providing basic services for people, a home, water, electricity, access to the internet, those types of things, if that could be provided now, on top of education, of course, which is a whole nother facet of this, which is really interesting, because if we look at education, I read a fascinating paper. I think it was up to date to 2018 or 2019. 52% of the people in the United States have a sixth grade education. Eight,
Wow.
18% of people are illiterate.
I did not know that.
Yeah, that blew me away. But when now, if you throw that into the context of narratives and propagandas and all this stuff, now you see
Wow.
why people are becoming so divided and so tribalized. There's a lack of ability to reason about the world on
Wow.
on a scale to the tune of 100 million plus people in this country. That's wild.
Wow.
Wild.
That's crazy. That changes everything.
Right. And so when you look at it like that, you go, oh, okay. So there's a lot more to this problem than on the surface, especially what you're getting from the information channels that most people subscribe to. And, when you start to add these things up, you say, okay, well, what is the problem? Why is there these socioeconomic divide? Um, well, yeah, if somebody grows up in the ghetto and their parents are making $500 a month tops, and or one parent more than
Right.
likely,
Right.
um, you know, what sort of opportunity, what sort of choices does that person have?
Limited.
Very limited, tragically limited, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and then we hear these hero stories about people who extricate themselves from these environments, and everybody goes, "Oh, see, it can be done." But what you're not hearing with the hero story is how many hundreds of thousands failed for
Yeah.
one hero.
Yep.
So when you start to look at these different nuances of this problem, and that's why I went down this path of a universal standard of living. Because if you cut out that, that provides the opportunity for somebody to actually have the sense, the time to themselves, the resources for themselves to say, hey, what do I want to do? Instead of just like, okay, how am I surviving today? Because the reality is there's a solid chunk of people. Well, I mean, I would hazard a guess, if 52% of people at a sixth grade education, more than likely, most of them are just surviving.
Yeah.
And I, it's not even a great education. I went through that system. It was pretty much garbage. But still, it still gave me a foundation enough that I was able to begin to teach myself to reason about the world, to understand logic, to understand systems, to, look at things from different perspectives. But if you don't have that education, well, now, I mean, oh my goodness, that's a travesty. I mean, to the definition of the word. And I don't see anybody talk about that.
Yeah.
Because again, that's not one of those things that is a campaign promise, a one or two sentence solution. That needs to be a complete revamp, a complete re-understanding of what we're doing. And there's not a lot of public will for that when public will is regulated by how much money somebody's getting. Because it's, and I think honestly, most people who have watched and reasoned about the system would look and say, hey, these people really don't have anybody's best interest in mind, but their self-serving agendas. They might have some friends and some family that they want to take care of, or they might have some relationships, but by and large, it's very much dictated by how much money somebody got from who and why they gave them that money, which is sad. Now, once you get to local levels, it's not as bad, right? And you do see the ability to have localized changes via this system because it's not entirely corrupted, but
Yeah.
it's going that way fast too. I mean, you have, just local Congress people for states getting, I saw $100,000 to just kind of toe the company line. I mean, it's, those types of things are insidious to us actually finding solutions to this problem. They sneak their way in and divide people with rhetoric, with all of these different propagandas, us versus them, red versus blue, blah 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 blah. And to your question, the solution to that is long, and I
Yeah.
think but I think there's a path to those solutions, and I was thinking about it this week actually, and I would call them. I came up with the term breakaway community,
I like it.
and I think if a community modeled itself, a small community modeled itself after having an equal opportunity platform, or where basic needs were provided. You could even have this structured as a corporation essentially, but we have the technology to have one person, one vote. It can
Yeah.
be anonymous, pseudo anonymous. It can be however we deem fit, and we have the ability to for everybody's voice to be heard. And I think if we started at the small scale and communal levels, that's a pathway to realize a solution to that problem. I don't think solutions are going to come from the top down. I think that ship has sailed.
Wow, that is well said. Very well said. I like those ideas. When I look at it through that lens, I would agree with you. We have had 100 years of trying to solve it from the top down, and it seems like it's just progressively gotten worse with that strategy.
Hmm.
And you're right. I think. uh, Do you know of any experiments or any things that are happening right now where there are these breakaway cities or these breakaway things? Have you heard about anything like that?
I mean, there's all sorts of different movements. You could go back to the hippie communes, or kind
Yeah,
of the
right.
the same idea, but you know, um, there's a lot of people who've declared like micronations,
Hmm.
and there's a couple. There I think there's a libertarian community up in I want to say Vermont or something like
Yeah,
that. That's kind of
the Freedom Project, I think.
the Freedom Project, and they use Bitcoin as kind of the
Yeah.
currency and things like that. So there are people who have, have tried these breakaway communities and are trying them. I think that it needs to be a bit more than, hey, do you guys like this idea? Let's do it together. I think there needs to be a bit more structure behind it. And I think that there needs to be, you know, I've actually programmed, I wrote a white paper and programmed a little bit of kind of a blockchain technology that would do the voting and whatnot. Um, and I think something like that as the foundation to a community like this, and then relying on technology and sustainability and focusing on things that we know enable long-term growth, enable long-term resources. And if it was a community very much dedicated and properly structured with the right technology, I think that could be a duplicatable model that would be able to replicate itself throughout the world.
Yeah, now that you say that, I remember hearing about some rhetoric about smart cities. I think they were going to have one in Arizona, one up in Canada somewhere. And
The problem, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Uh,
There's some problems there. What do you hear about those?
well, the problem with the smart city is again, it goes back to this entire thing of, well, who's building the smart city? What do they want for building the smart city?
Right.
Obviously, nobody's motivated unless there's a return on investment these days. From now there is philanthropy and there are people who, donate to causes and whatnot. But in terms of building an entire city, I'm pretty sure that there's somebody who wants a kickback on the end of that. And so, one of the necessary points of these communities would be that the structure of them is distributed. It's decentralized. So just like we were talking about earlier, the establishment of Western democracy slash republic was the decentralization of power. Now we have the technology and the ability to decentralize those power structures into a communal structure where the individual has the power. So and that would and to mediate all of this, instead of having a judiciary, we have a program, one that can't be swayed, one that doesn't have emotions, and you know is just strictly X amount of people voted on it, and this is the path we're going to take. And then all of a sudden, that shifts the conversation back to the community. Because now, if I'm truly passionate about something that's coming up for a vote in our community, well, I'm going to go out and I'm going to talk to people. I'm
Yeah.
not going to protest because there's nothing to protest. I'm going to have a conversation because I'm passionate about this, and I need to, and I want to and convince you of all of this, and why we should vote yes, why we should vote no. And when we do that, when you remove that kind of, from a game theory perspective, when you remove that arbiter, that point of authority, now instead of there being somebody to be angry at, so it usurps actually having to put in the effort of a conversation. There's nobody to be angry at, and so the only way to get things done, if you actually truly are passionate about it, is to converse with other people in your community.
Yeah, I like it. I wonder. It seems to me that there's a number there, and I don't know what that number is. If it's a 10,000 or 100,000, but it
Mhm.
seems at some point in time that that would break down. If it got too big, that would break down. There would have to be some sort of familiarity, something like that, or some sort of
Yeah.
foundational identification that everybody shared, right? But
Well,
I like it.
I would say it absolutely does break down at a larger number of scale, but where it differs is you can have multiple nodes of these,
Mm.
right? They can all be independent to one another, but they can all still have things that affect them regionally, which is exactly what government is. right? The whole idea of government is that it's supposed to, take this vast landscape of territory and people and be able to democratize the relationship between everybody. So, but if everybody's little community handled their local, you could have a regional group, a regional vote. There could be things that would affect a region, like, you know, if there was three of these over, a 200 square mile area, and the watershed that they all used was drying up or was having problems, or somebody wanted to put a dam in it or something like that, those would be a regional thing that could then be voted on. Now, again, this does have problems at scale, just like our our problems at scale right now. But what it does is it takes and puts the individual value back in there, promotes radical self-responsibility, and at the same time, it it takes the individual, and now every individual is a representative. A lot of the problems I think we have are because we have representatives who are supposed to represent crazy amounts of people that it's just there's no reality that they could actually represent all of those people, even if they wanted to. So when you shift that power dynamic, I think the equation changes a little bit, because yeah, you're going to have people that are just going to be like, oh, I don't care. But you're also going to have people who rally around ideas. And now it's a discussion about ideas instead of people. And I
Hmm.
think that's the key distinction.
Hmm. Yeah. It's all in some ways, if we look at it like nodes or cities and towns, like we almost have like our government is a similar framework. So let me just try to say this.
Mhm.
Is that idea that you have, could we use our existing framework of our government now if we just switched from people's rights to ideas?
Um, Interesting question. Uh, I would say potentially, but I would also say at the same time, the problem is that uh, it's all focused on people.
Mm, like
And
we the people instead of we the ideas.
we the people's fine, but I think the idea thing is the extrapolation of the individual when you're looking at a community of individuals. Now we need to have a conversation about ideas. Where what we do in the Western world is, instead of having that conversation about ideas, we elect a person to go have that conversation for us.
Hmm.
So, and back to the motivation and profit and all of those things, would that person be inclined to give up that role for the betterment of society, in terms of just like, we're all about ideas anymore. Our representatives are representing us. They're only a mechanism of promoting ideas. I don't know if that would work, just because of how entrenched these profit motivations are in the world today. I mean,
Yeah. So I'm sorry.
yeah. No, no, no. Go ahead.
So if instead of having a representative, if we had the framework where we could all just, I mean, everybody's got a mobile phone. If you could just be like,
Hmm.
here's where we are as a community on, uh, get, I don't know, pick your whatever your community problem is. Here's where our community stands on carbon capture.
Hmm.
You know, I think you could get a very a much better representation of what the people in that node want versus what the representative is paid to do. I think they could do that
Absolutely.
now, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's these things out there. They're called DAOs in the blockchain world, and it's basically a decentralized corporation.
Mhm.
And they have different types of structures, like, depending on how much of the token that you own, you gain voting rights, et cetera, et
Right.
cetera. Uh, there's inherent problems with those types
What
of
what are
systems.
those? What are the problems with the DAOs?
Well,
They get
first,
captured? Sorry.
well, yeah, one of those is being captured by a small group of people, because once you create a limit of who can participate, now that becomes a barrier to entry.
Right.
Uh, the other part of those problems is participation, actually.
Yes.
So let's say I create a threshold that 33% of the voting populace needs to vote in order for us to pass any referendum. What happens if I can't get 33% of the party to vote, or 33% of the group to vote on anything, simply because of there's not enough organization, there's not enough communication, and I've seen this happen with a few different DAOs where, because the crypto market's mostly speculation, people just bought in to speculate. They don't really care about the actual governance issues of this thing. Why would I care if you guys are going to get an extra 0.5% for mining rewards? I'm here to make some money.
Right.
So there has to be a balance of incentives, just like there has, like we talked about the incentives in the Western world being completely out of whack. The DAO worlds are mostly out of whack too, because the whole premise behind most of the people getting involved is speculatory at this point. If you look at blockchain on a graph of uh, market penetration, it's probably just past 12, 15, 20% market penetration, which means it's on its rise like this, and it'll rise very quickly to 90% market penetration, simply because the cost of trust is mitigated from institutions and operations down to the cost of electricity. So it's just more economical to underlie blockchain for all sorts of things, deeds, titles, all, any sort of mechanism where you might need a notary or any sort of escrow service. So instead of all of those things having, buildings and people and computers and networks and systems, now all of a sudden you have one single program that moderates the entire thing. The cost of running these is just so dramatically different that if I'm a business that adopts this, my operating costs, even if I'm the small guy, are going to be minuscule compared to the big guy. So now I can, and because small guys start competing, big guys adopt. And it's kind of how it goes. So those alignment of factors are very key, and why a community like this would be successful versus why it wouldn't. And I think, looking at it, and I've thought about it for quite some time, there needs to be a meritocracy component to it. So the people who are working for the community, the people who are invested, the people not necessarily invested monetarily, but invested with their time and effort, those people need to have some form of compensation. And so I think there's a balance to be struck between essentially socialism, meritocracy, and democracy. And I think striking that balance is, I think we could actually solve many of these problems. And it's an interesting balance to strike, right? Because you're going to piss off just about everybody.
Yeah, it's the only way. There has to be some form of it. It's interesting. Like, two of the most interesting people I know live in Colorado. That'd be you and Charles Hodgkinson, who's the main or one of the guys that he's the main guy for Cardano, but he's one of the main guys in blockchain technology, and he is, they have had problems with getting people to vote on stuff, and pools being captured and stuff that way. But I think that there's something to be said about a slight change in our idea of, be it socialism or be it, democracy or be it capitalism. And I think you could just maybe, the same way that you shave off one molecule to get DMT from psilocybin, you get to shave off one little piece of those and get a whole new system. I think there's got to be a better way there.
I think so. I think there is. I mean, it's kind of been a passion project for me for 15 years, to be honest. I was originally traveling down in Central and South America, and you know, I met indigenous tribes, and they were completely self-sustained. They had hundreds of people completely self-sustained, all working in a communal level, and nobody was working nearly as hard as anybody in the Western world. And then I saw, smaller communities that were integrated into Western society, and you know, they're sustainable there too. And then all of a sudden you get to, like, the central cities, and these things are completely in utter disarray. I mean, the jungle's taking back the city as you're walking through the city. I mean, you see, just erupting trees and whatnot, and you go, oh, okay, so this is a little different than these beautiful, sustainable beach communities and jungle communities. So, what breaks? And the idea that something is sustainable is, I think, one of the key components to all of this. That community, whether it be through individual effort or an automated system, or a partially automated robotic process, uh, needs to generate all of its own food, needs to capture all of its own water, needs to generate all of its own electricity. If you don't have that sustainable component as a part of these cities, that's when you get these kind of runaway growth situations. And that's when you end up with these massive mega cities that we have today, that if the trucks stop being able to show up for whatever reason, you have 18 million people killing each other in 3 days
Yeah.
for food. I mean, that's a dangerous thing to be teetering on if you think about it from just an objective perspective. So I think integrating that sustainable portion with all of these other kind of foundational axioms, a universal standard of living, decentralized one vote, one person system, yeah, meritocracy on top of that socialist universal standard of living, and then the democracy in there. I think when you start to play with these and put these together, you can create systems that solve many, if not all, of our problems that we face today.
Okay, let me ask you this. I love that, and I think that is accurate. I believe in a system like that. But it seems to me one of the major drawbacks, or the fundamental drawback, would be you would have to have a worldview, a narrative, and a story for those people that live in those communities.
Well, kind of. There's something else I left out in that,
Okay.
which was um, removing the roadblocks to personal wealth generation. So capitalism needs to have a play in that as well. For me to start a business today, you have to register with the state. You have to usually get a lawyer if you don't know what you're doing. You have to, and then you don't even know what you're setting up if you're doing it that way, because how many people actually got schooled in business law and business structures and all these things. And there's so many barriers of entry. And then let alone if I actually want to do something with like a hardware or chemicals or anything like that. Now all of a sudden the barriers of entry continue to stack up. So to the point that if I'm not somebody who's exceptionally credentialed or has a massive network of people or a pool of wealth to draw from,
you can't even
I can't participate.
Right.
Even if I have a fantastic idea. And I can't even float that idea to have somebody tell me that it's not even a fantastic idea, because I can't even pay enough to get that feedback. So removing those barriers of entry to personal wealth generation. So now imagine you have a universal standard of living, so I'm not worried about paying the bills. But now I want to go out and I have a passion. I have something that interests me. I really got into, rocketry or whatever. Now I can go out and my entire focus is that. Now, part of this crypto network would be to enable that each individual would have access to the ability to sell their own goods and services at no cost. It's just part of your app on your phone, right? So now I don't have the barriers of entry to get into business. I don't have the barriers of entry to subsist, so I can try business. Uh, Now I can go out and test my ideas against the marketplace, and without having to worry about fulfilling all of these other resource draining things. That creates a wealth of innovation, of creativity, because you're removing the constraints of what's drawing people's focus away from those passions, from those ideas, from those pursuits.
That's awesome. I never thought about it like that. Yeah. In some ways, I guess we're kind of seeing a glimpse of that. I mean, you and I can come on here and we can have
Mhm.
conversations about the future and the past and what we think and how we feel. How how would that just be like a everybody's phone comes with like a Shopify account, or like what would it be like?
Kind of, yeah, yeah, but you would make it a little bit more of an automated thing, and then so the white paper that I wrote, if you created this environment where at the end user you could, they're basically their own business. Um, Now what happens is you're going to have an increase of transactions on the network, and that means more value being shifted in the network, which means more value generated in the network, which means more value for the communal organization. And that's what provides that feedback loop, is what provides the ability to provide the universal standard of living, to have the upkeep, to have all of these things. And so the idea is you create a, a truly sustainable system, not from just like a power production standpoint or a food standpoint, but a humanity sustainable production where it's not just about living and surviving. It's also about gaining wealth and growth, and
Thriving.
in thriving. And we have the technology to build that today, 100%. Now you need the will and the resources to accomplish it. Nobody wants to give up resources because there's no profit to be made by investing in it. That's the caveat.
Yeah. You want to build this thing and just let all these people use it for free? I can't believe it. What's wrong with you? We're gonna give that away.
And then, but if you do it that way, and the meritocracy, and this is where the meritocracy component comes in, as people generate their wealth, and it's going to naturally raise the tide, and all ships on a raising tide type thing. The entire community, the wealth of the community is going to go up by each individual success, not by taxing them or taking something from them, or having them go through a patent process which is going to get ripped off, or any of these shenanigans, but simply by the fact that it's creating more transactions on the network. It's drawing more attention, and it's not, and as that happens, more and more people are going to get attention, and the whole network will grow. So that, and that meritocracy component comes into play as you invest more into the system, as the system grows from your creativity, from all of these, then wealth comes back, twofold, threefold to the entire community.
Yeah, it's I wonder if Google or Yahoo or YouTube, they could almost do that now. Like if
Oh,
they
sure. I estimated to get a group of basically 10,000 people doing this, it'd be, probably $1.2 billion. And that would be to build the foundation. The next one would cost a fifth of that. And then the next one would cost a fifth of that. And it kind of goes like this. But the cost goes down over time. It's the initial cost to set this up, which is the big burden. It's the big hurdle to cross. But yeah, somebody like a Google, a YouTube, a Facebook, instead of focusing on VR, they could
yeah.
build real real
We
reality.
are. All right, but we got a question here, man. Let's see
All right.
what our friends have to say. It says, "Hi, this is from Anthony Hayes. What's up, Anthony? Thanks for
Hi,
listening.
Anthony.
Hi, guys. Listening to what you're trying to put out there, I'd like to add, in the days of Noah, corruption of the dual and mind got so bad that God decided enough was enough. Man's ignorance in those days are far lesser than today. We just seen in England the shops running bare as people's self-greed and self-importance became clear. How dogs behave in moments of trouble and shutdowns. Your societies that you are talking about forget the one basis of human greed and corruption. That, oh, I think that is that more there? That you. I think it's okay. So I guess what he's trying to say here is that the very foundation of greed will make it so that we can't do it. What say you, Mr. Wizard?
Well, we were just talking about this in the game theory perspective.
Yes,
when you have a greedy player, the choices that they're going to choose are going to negatively impact the others. That's pretty much what he's saying.
Agreed.
The difference in this type of proposed system would be that your greed does not take away from someone else's opportunity.
Right.
Because in the wider world, that's typically what it is. When a greedy actor acts in that way, they're removing the opportunity from other people.
Right.
When you have a universal standard of living, now that greed, while it may still remove some of their opportunities, not going to really impact their bottom line of living life. So now and this is kind of getting into psychology of people, if you might have taken away my ability to earn $1 and now I can only earn 90 cents because you beat me to market about this, or you stole this from some other person or whatnot. But I'm going to go home. I'm going to be able to eat. I have food. I have my family, my friends. I have my entertainment. I still have my opportunities. Now I can just form a better idea. My response to somebody, as opposed to, hey, you just removed the ability for me to provide for my family. My kid is going hungry right now because you took something from me. These are two very, very different, psychological paths on how we look and view the world when we are done wrong against.
Right.
If it's something that's really impacting, those I truly love and care about, and it's taking away my ability to provide for them, that's a whole different game. That's when people pick up weapons, right?
Yeah, that's when. Agreed.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the idea of a universal basic lifestyle, I think one factor that I haven't heard us talk too much about, which you just touched on there, is it gives you back your time, your greatest asset. It allows you to be the sole proprietor of that which you do. You're no longer are going to have this slave mentality. And and touching on what our listener said is, instead of it being, I'm greedy, you took $1 from me. Yeah, I came up and I made this better, but that money is going to be funneled back into the foundation, at least some of it, where now there's been this blockage that, it goes to the top and it's supposed to come back, but it gets caught up in this guy's family office. You know what I mean? There's like a little
trickle down. Yeah.
Trickle down. Trickle off to the side into this other account that I have over here. I got a rain capture, a little gutter. It goes right over here, all the runoff.
Trickle down into my dam. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I think that is something that should be factored in, is this idea of your time, because that's probably the only one thing that we all have that is equal, is that we all have 24 hours in a day. And some people have the great fortune of being able to utilize all those hours without having to go put their shoulder to the wheel for the man. In a sort of way.
Well, and the thing is how many people are living paycheck to paycheck?
A lot.
Yeah, it's so many. And the reality of that situation is that every single dollar you're making, you're already spending it in your mind. It's causing you stress. It's causing you worry. It's causing you concern. You're not focused on what makes you passionate. You don't give a shit about what makes you passionate at that
Right.
point. You just care about paying the damn bills.
Yeah.
So this is, when you remove that aspect of somebody's pathology, when they're not worried about just paying the bills, when they're not worried about how they're not going to make it, how, all the things they're not going to be able to do, when their effort is rewarded with now all the things that they can potentially do or are, and have a larger propensity to do. Now you change the entire psychology of the situation. You change the motivations for why people do it. You change how, through those changes of motivation, you're going to be changing, how hard people work, their efficiency of work, their application to getting better at whatever they're doing. Whereas when you're paycheck to paycheck, you don't really care.
Yeah. You don't have the luxury of caring. And
You don't have the luxury of caring. Correct. Yeah.
how much, gosh, it makes me think of so many things. How much of the mental illness today is a direct reflection of people's ability to only scratch by? People tend to define themselves by what they do, which is such a
Mm-hmm.
poor. I wish they wouldn't do that. Like, you're so much more than what you do. You
Mm-hmm.
are a brother, a father, a sister, a husband, a lover. There's so many things, but some people are like, I'm a truck driver. Like, that's the one thing you
Right.
go with. Like, no, okay,
Mm-hmm.
you're that, but you're all these other things. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that that's this unhealthy feedback loop that people get into. Be them a successful stockbroker, a lawyer, a president. When you
Mm-hmm.
pigeonhole yourself into this one identity, and especially when that identity is living paycheck to paycheck, that's when
Mm-hmm.
you start going crazy. It's like, oh my God, I'm this one thing. Like, and you cut off so much of who you are, and you've cut off of the possibilities of what you can become or what you can be or what other people think of you. And I really like this idea. I think there's a lot to explore there. And I wonder what it would be like if time was the actual currency that people could spend. I think that would be phenomenal.
And that's ultimately what this kind of structure gets to. And the fledgling of the idea came from watching these indigenous tribes, actually,
Mm.
as I was traveling. And, I went and stayed with them. I know a little bit of medical stuff, so I fixed up a couple scrapes and cuts, and applied some antibiotics and whatnot. But watching their daily lives is, yeah, they were working hard. They were working hard for the first 4 hours of the day when they woke up right before the sun, went out, caught some fish, got all the water for the day, harvested all the vegetables for the day. And guess what the rest of the day was? It was hanging out, having a good time, enjoying the morning catch, enjoying the harvest, enjoying each other's company. And yeah, it wasn't always equal, and depending on where they
Right.
were in the world and the access to resources, but there was a fair number of them who were living much more quality lives than I would
Yes.
say anybody living a paycheck to paycheck is. And so the idea, exactly what you said, is what happens when you have your time back? And what happens when that's the arbiter of your daily processes and what you're going and want to do today? I don't even know that I how many people get to the point where they get to do what they want today. I don't think there's quite a few in the Western world. Probably a small number.
Yeah, and we teach kids in at the very earliest age that, if you look at the Prussian model that we have moved in here, it's, you stand in front of an authority figure and you listen to these bells like a Pavlovian dog, and you raise your hand to go
Mhm.
to the bathroom when you get a hall pass.
Mhm.
It's like we're building the next generation of obedient workers, and it's been going on for way too long.
Well, that
You
was the
know,
whole education system anyway, right?
it
It was
was,
it
yeah.
was founded. I forget the guy's name, but he designed an education system to make workers, and
Yeah.
that's what we adopted as our education system by some glorious, you know, use of the human brain.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I forget the quote. We have enough philosophers. We have enough, like,
Hmm.
I, But you know what? Maybe that's what was. Maybe if we look back at it, maybe we needed that to get where we are today, so that we can build this new system going forward.
Well, I think you can never argue against something, right? Because all of those choices, all of that effort, everything that had happened has brought us to today. I mean, that's
Yeah.
yeah, all we stand on the shoulders of giants, whether those giants were indoctrinated workers or not. However, I think it does beg the question of, could we be in a different place had we taken, had we, instead of focusing on as the human as a commodity, if we focus on the human as the end goal, if we're all, for lack of a better word, we're all creators.
Yeah.
Even the thoughts in our head are producing waves that, energy and frequencies that are going out and interacting with everything else around us. In my model, it's impacting the unfolding of reality. But beyond that, we are the arbiters of this earth. We are the people who create all the things. We are the people who are building all of the structures and all of these things. So we are creators. And if the focus was on building better creators, radical individuals who were completely self-sustainable, who understood reason, understood logic, know how to absorb information, understand the scientific method, able to apply these perspectives and processes to everyday life, would we be in a better place? I think we would be, personally. Because every single person who I've met in my life who's taken the time to get to that stage does wonders for the people around them, their community. They're the pillars of their communities. And I don't find too many pillars of communities that don't have those attributes.
Yeah, I agree. I think I think that I think we could adopt that and move it forward, like you said. I would really love to read that white paper. Maybe you can shoot that over to me, and we could cover through that.
So,
yeah, please.
Oh, no, go ahead.
How do you think that transition would begin? Let's say we could begin to implement, sort of some changes that would lead to what we were talking about. How would we begin a transition like that?
I think there's two initial hurdles. One is the resources that we talked about.
Right.
The second is really the proper education system. We would need we need to revamp the education system. Obviously, if 52% of people are only getting to sixth grade and 18% are illiterate, we're not doing a good job.
Right.
So there needs to be, that's one of the larger hurdles that, I see personally, is because the other side of that coin is, those people who are on the lesser side of education, yeah, they're going to have a lot of common sense, but they're not going to have any reasoning capabilities for these type of ideas. And to them, they're stuck in the paycheck to paycheck, the resource driven, environment. To look into, the future is something that most people can't do, but most people don't even have the luxury to do, as we talked about. Yeah, if the resources could be overcome, it's simply a matter of, excuse me, simply a matter of just getting the first few people who want to build the damn thing. I mean, that's kind of how everything starts. It's, if you can get a few people who really want to build something like that, magic will happen. Kind of Field of Dreams it.
Yeah. If you build it, they'll come.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's interesting. I recently wrote a paper to my child's school, and I had this idea of, if you just changed the structure of what the school is. I'm really lucky. She goes to an awesome school, and I thought to myself, like, what if we did this thought experiment where, you on some level, you would have to try out for the school. And I had some problems with that, but the audition for the school could be like, okay, what can you do? And you don't have to be really wealthy, but if maybe you can build a Tongan wall, or maybe you're good at agriculture, but I think that there should be some sort of at least attributes. Okay, like what can you do here? Let me hear what your ideas are. If you're going to have a school for leaders to go to, what can you do? And once you could figure out how to,
well, that's
really coming out
actually
the way I wanted to.
it's a really old model. That's the ancient mystery schools. I'm not sure how familiar you are with those.
I
But that
love the
was
ancient mystery schools.
so, especially the oldest ones. It was, you would come in and the only people who were initiated into those schools were people who actually were really well educated or well resourced or well defined in the world. But then those entire schools were 15-year processes,
Yeah.
most of them, uh, to actually create leaders and create masters, or, depending on what school you're talking
Yeah.
about. And so, yeah, that model has been around for as long as we've been around.
Probably longer, right?
Quite a bit longer, probably. And I there is something to that, because again, this kind of goes back to the meritocratic aspect of things.
Right.
There should be, somebody who spends the time and effort,
Yeah.
who makes the sacrifices, frankly, from enjoyment and entertainment and all these other things to achieve the ability to not just have the idea, but to reconcile the idea and speak about it and try to convince other people about it, and become a leader or things like this. That should be recognized in society, because those are the people who truly make society better. Objectively, looking back at history.
Yeah.
Um, and so you want to reward those people, and I think having a system like that, where yeah, you're in this thing, but it's not going to be a short process, and it's not going to be
Right.
a luxurious process, and it's not going to be something that you get out and you're like, hey, cool, pay me $1 billion type thing, because that's kind of those are the upper echelons of what we call our elite schools these days.
Right.
um, if you remove those things and it was just focused on creating better leaders, better pillars of community, uh, I think that's something that would be exceptionally beneficial to society as a whole.
Yeah. Imagine a group of, like, say, second graders,
Mhm.
and maybe you have a class of 10 or 12, and you come up with an idea, and so you have this group of second graders, or maybe you even have an elementary school, and once a year the kids get together and they form a group, and each group has a project they work on. They work on it for 6 months, and then after 6 months you have like this, almost like a job fair slash kind of a Burning Man thing, where you go up on stage and you invite the community into the school, and you say, here's this product we created, here's this service created, here's this new type of music we've created. Each cohort can have their own project that they did, and it doesn't have to be limited to anything. It can be whatever it is they've chosen to do. They
You
get
know
up, they
what?
present it.
I
Please.
think you just hit the nail on the head.
Okay.
Uh, you invite the community into the education process.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. You invite them in.
You
Right?
invite because why wouldn't you? For one,
Right.
right? And
But
yeah,
now it's their
there's
idea to come in.
right, there's garbage like science fairs and stuff like that, but those are only like weekend events. What
Right.
you're talking about is the exploration of a young mind, and then
Yes.
bringing in the community to not only reinforce that, the wonderful ideas and the creativity, but then also to identify, things that are going to grow the community.
And
Yeah,
each kid, yeah.
yeah.
Each each
Hmm.
each kid or group would naturally gravitate towards the stage in which they were like, look at this thing, this is awesome. And then the
Yep.
school or the entity if it was a good service or project or product, the school could invest in those kids and be like, let's start this business. Now the kids are in a business with this place.
And that's where that crypto network comes back into play.
Yes.
Because, and this is that, one person, one vote, and the decentralized aspect of all of that. But now all of a sudden, a portion of your app on your phone is, student community projects. And you can pull that up. And even if you weren't at the school that day, you see the videos, you see the multimedia of all these things. And you're like, holy cow, that's awesome. A sixth grader thought of that?
Yeah.
Let's prop these sixth graders up. And anybody in the community can then be like, hey, we want to invest $10,000 in these sixth graders to explore their idea, to, whatever. And, and things like that in the crypto network, you have different levels of voting. Not everybody needs to vote on everything all the time. I think that's part of the problem with these DAOs. You have a regional thing. If it's just a group of school kids at a local, 70-person school, well, the only people who should really be impacted by that are the 70, the 140 parents roughly in that local environment. And they can vote to invest network funds at a certain scale. And so you break these certain scales off, and yeah, it's gonna be a hit and miss for a minute, and it's gonna be some trial and error. But I think the idea, the mechanism, the underlying mechanism works itself out. Because now if you have the people who are truly interested in that cool idea as the only people who are the arbiters of where money should go and where resources should go to these ideas, then guess what community is going to get good? The ones who are benefiting themselves by investing in these ideas of the community. I mean, it becomes a feedback loop again.
Yeah. There's, and it makes me excited because I think we're there. Like, I think that ideas like this, conversations like we're having, books like No Absolutes, like I think that this is the beginning of the new form that we've kind of been talking about. And it's exciting to me.
Exciting to me too. My thing is I've also, I've been the passion project of putting a community together like this has been 15 years in the making for me. I came up with the original idea 15 years ago and thought I had it all figured out. Took 15 years before I could say, yeah, I got a good chunk of it figured out at least. But, these types of conversations, the ability for us to communicate with people at a personal level, especially, allows us, I think, to take this next step. That's part of the reason that I'm now coming out and talking about my book and talking about these ideas, is because I think that conversation needs to happen in this world. And if it doesn't happen, well, I mean, I don't think it'd take a rocket scientist to look around and say, shit's kind of going off the rails, folks.
Yeah, and it's so welcoming to be on a level where you can talk to someone and and previously we were talking about the problems with top-down organization. But when we start speaking of things like, let's invite the community to come in and be part of it, like now you're talking about a real opportunity for everyone to participate instead of being forced into this box or pushed over here or allowed to do this. Hey, I'm inviting you to be part of the solution. And there's something that changes in the way you think about the world and the way you participate in the world when you're given the opportunity or the invitation to be creative, or the opportunity to, hey, let's see what you could do here. I really think that that's when creative change and real change and even magic can happen, is when people have that. That's giving back our time. That's seeing ourselves different. That's seeing ourselves as a team or part of the other rather than an adversarial role in a competitive world.
Or a commodity.
Or a commodity. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's lifting the veil of commodification from people's vision, I think.
I think so too. I think you touched on it, but I think there is tremendous value in that. Tremendous value. Because from my own personal experience, it was when I first came up with that idea, and then I started living more of that lifestyle, even though I couldn't afford to really. I was still hustling. I was a
Sure.
digital nomad before digital nomad was a coined term, and so I wasn't making the money a digital nomad made, but I was surviving. But just slowly being able to integrate myself into that model at a personal level really just changed my entire perspective on not just myself, my potential, but also other people. I have a genuine love for everybody,
Yeah.
perfectly frank. Now, there's people who, because of their deeds and choices, a little less love. And there's some people who, they don't get any of it, but because of same things. But at a general scale, I love people. And everywhere I've traveled in the world, people are just people. They want
Yeah.
the same things, and they're all pleasant and wonderful and inviting and caring. And there was one time I was down in Nicaragua, and I was traveling out to this place called the Corn Islands, and you have to stop in a place called Bluefield, and then take a boat out there. This was back in the day, and so I'm stuck there for a couple days. So I'm just kind of wandering around, me and a buddy, and really just, I mean, lean-to shacks with sheet metal and wood just kind of thrown together, probably, 4 or 5 screws for the whole thing type idea. Super hot, 105 degrees that day or whatever, humidity's through the roof. We're just sweating on the side of the road, taking a break, and this sweet lady comes up and she's like, "Hey, can I offer you some ice water?" Like, in Spanish, and we figured it
Sure.
out in my broken Spanish at the time. And so she takes us back to this little lean-to shack, sends her daughter out to run down the street to go get ice, cleans out a couple plastic cups, which looked like the only plastic cups she owned, set us down. We're strangers, mind you.
Yeah.
Set us down. Um, her son was there trying to cool us off with the fan, and daughter comes back with ice. She pours us water and puts a fresh lemon in it, just smiles the whole time. Now, mind you, we're both we broken Spanish, so we're not really communicating. This was just a gesture by somebody who had absolutely nothing but a little bit of shade and the ability to get some ice water, and brought us in and just took care of us. And then we ended up staying, and she, had a conversation. We ended up buying him dinner because why not?
Yeah.
I mean, it was a wonderful day where I just got to have a human experience. And I could go on for probably another hour with stories like that. And people are people. They want the same things. They want family. They want security. They want exploration. They want adventure. They want to feel good. They want to feel taken care of. They want to feel respected. They want to have opportunity. Um, when you start to get a little bit further away and people are in tribes and groups of people and stereotypes and all this other stuff, well, a lot of problems start to arise. But at the end of the day, people are just people.
Yeah. What a beautiful lesson that lady taught you. And I'm sure you have
Mhm.
caught that lesson before, but what
Oh,
a
yeah.
beautiful, you know what I mean? Like what a beautiful situation where here you are, a stranger in a strange land, and sometimes I think that's just the earth or a force bigger than you can imagine, just kind of giving you a hug, like, hey man, I got you. And it makes me want to do that for other people.
Mm,
There's this, can I share a quick story with you here?
absolutely.
Thank
Love it.
you. So I'm a UPS driver, and on my route, there's one thing I have found is that no matter what you do, you can find something to do while you're doing it and make it more enjoyable. And one of the things I like to do is I get to know all the families and kids on my route. And sometimes there's just these beautiful little moments that happen. There's this little boy. He's probably maybe 4 years old, little Japanese boy. And like he barely speaks English. And whenever I pull up by his house, he comes running out of his house. And he says he'll just stand there like his eyes are all big. I'm like, you want to see inside the truck? And he's like, and for like the first year, all he could say in English was "yep." So it would be, "You want to see inside the truck?" "Yep." Hey, you want to look over here? Yep. Did you go to
Yep.
school today? Yep. You know, it is so damn cute.
Hmm.
I got a little UPS truck, and whenever I see them, I'll hand them some stuff. But it's just this little thing that you wouldn't expect, like this the bright smile on a 4-year-old kid that doesn't even speak the same language, kind of
Hmm.
makes. And there's been days I've been having such a crappy day, and I show up and like I'm not even thinking about it. I see this kid run out, and I'm like, you know what? To this kid, I am something awesome right now. Like he looks forward every day to seeing this truck pull up, and it
Hmm.
fundamentally changes the way I see myself, the world, relationships. Just this little
A
lesson
moment of
life's
time.
teaching me.
Yeah, a little
Yeah.
moment of time, a little shot of perspective. You know,
Oh gosh, that's beautiful.
there was, again, many stories, but there was another one where I was in the middle of San Jose, Costa Rica, a couple million people in the town. I'm lost. I'm in downtown. I've asked 4 people for directions, and I don't know how familiar you are with most Latin cultures, but they don't like to tell you no.
Right.
So I got 4 different directions in 4 different directions, and so I'm completely lost at this point, and I'm sitting there looking at a map and like looking at buildings, and this little old lady who must have been 75 to 85 comes up, doesn't speak a lick of English, of course, and she asked me where I'm going, and I knew enough to tell her where I was going, and she grabs my arm and she walked me to where I needed to be. That I can honestly say that moment changed my life, because that was like I was frustrated, I was stressed, I'd been in the country for about 2 months at that point, and I had had some good times, I had some bad times, and today I just needed. I forget exactly where I was trying to go. I needed to get something done though, and I'd been led astray 4 separate times by good intentioned people,
Sure.
and then this little old lady out of nowhere just grabs my arm and walks me to exactly where I need to be, which was, by the way, 6 blocks away and took 30 minutes. And I was just like, wow. And ever since then, I'll always go out of my way to, make sure that somebody needs to find their destination, simply because that woman did it to me.
See, okay, listen to the language there. Like, do you think that that's the way the world works? Like sometimes when you get frustrated, a force shows up and then shows you the way. Like you said, your destination. That sounds pretty close to destiny. You know, in a weird sort of way, it's almost like, who's to say the world we see is the way the world it is? Maybe these people we see are just different forces, and we've manifested them in our own mind. And this force is, oh, okay, I see what's happening. You're a little too stressed out to interpret the reality. Let me have this person show you the way. It's almost like this invisible hand guiding us, you know?
Well, in my model of things, that goes into the every other moment's connected to every moment,
I like that.
the infinite sea of potentiality.
I love it.
Uh, and when you're in that mode, you're creating a very strong presence. People can feel that type of energy coming off of
Yeah.
people, and for whatever reason, and you could get in talking about the reasons, but that person's in the right moment at that right time, picks up on that right signal, and you know I also say there's no coincidence.
Agreed.
And so when something like that happens, I feel it's important to pay attention. And I've spent the past 15 years of my life paying attention to moments similar to that, which has led me to here now. And I'm thankful for every single step of every single lesson along that path. Uh, so yes, to answer your question, I do think there is a confluence of aspects of nature, of reality, of the universe that do generate our unfolding of reality. And we are a direct impact upon that. Again, attaching back to the creator conversation, we are creating our own reality. Just so happens you're creating it with 8 other billion people and trillion, a couple 100 billion plants and a lot of billions of animals and all these other things and all these other things. Uh, but yes, you are a part of that system, and that system responds directly to you, whether you're entirely aware of it, or whether it just is a partial recognition or something like that, or maybe you don't even see it. It still happens. And I think the more that we observe these types of events, and are aware of these things in our life, the greater the appreciation becomes for just how much a part of everything else we are. And that's where, personally, my love for, people is born from, because we are a part of this whole thing and it's all unfolding. Um, I'm naturally inquisitive and I've solved a lot of life's riddles, but I want to see where it's going. What are we unfolding? Why? What for? Those are fun questions for me personally. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that it's like a origami goose,
Mm,
but then you
mm,
then you you fold over one corner, like now it's a praying mantis. Now it's
mhm.
a frog. Wait a minute, what's going on here? And it's just this infinite folds that keep on unfolding, and it's it's sometimes it's easy to forget that, and
Mm,
it's easy to realize that when times get tough, it's difficult to remember that you are having a actual physical response. It's difficult to realize that you're part of the reason it's like that. Does that kind of make sense? Like sometimes I get caught up,
yeah,
and if I get
yeah.
in cruise control, like I forget that I'm the one in control, or maybe not in control, but I'm the one who is at least interacting with this thing.
Well, you have an effect.
Yeah,
Is
thank you.
Yeah.
That's right.
Control assumes that you're holding on to the wheel, and nobody's
Yeah,
holding on to the wheel.
right, right, right,
I'm pretty
right,
sure we can all agree on that. you know.
right,
But yeah, uh, you have the ability to influence, the direction of
right.
things, and yeah, we do get lost in that. If it's a crazy day, you're not thinking about any of that. That's the farthest thing from your mind. You're trying to survive the dang day. You're
Yeah.
trying to get
Yep.
done what you have to get done. You're trying to not be busy. You're trying to take care of everybody's needs, yada, yada, yada. And yeah, this goes back to the idea of how we build our communities and society. But if again you were able to have more control over, I'm not just looking for resources and trying to find some sustained level of subsistence. Now I'm actually out here in the world. Imagine how that changes somebody's perspective in those daily events. You're not caught up in them anymore. Now your choice is much more your own. The ability to impact those events becomes a much more cognizant and aware process, right? And I think there's absolutely power in that, not from just a personal level, but from the ability for people to get beyond themselves and have conversations like this.
If we, let me ask you this question here. I agree. I want to be part of the team that provides people with more time. It seems like though in our reality, what's happening is that there is a massive amount of influence, a massive amount of money, a massive amount of power that's desperately trying to take your time from you.
Hmm.
What would be like, how would you get those entities to try to stop taking or going after people's time? Because it seems like if we all want to have more time and open up ourselves to the world, we have to control our own time and we have to be cognizant of that. And it just seems like there's so much powerful interest trying to make sure that you don't do that. How
So
would you shift that?
now here's the magic of the idea:
Okay, awesome.
is you outcompete them in the marketplace.
All right, I'm
You're
listening.
not you're not you're not trying to shift their gears. You're not going to shift their gears.
Okay.
These are institutions that are enthralled in their models, and they will they're zombies to change. But the one thing and the one place that you can compete against these people, these institutions, is in the marketplace. And when you create an environment where all of the people in the organization are not only able to have their time and energy be spent mostly on their ideas and bringing those into the world.
Mm.
But you also take away the barriers of entry, the leeches, the parasites along the way who are sucking the wealth of those ideas out as they come to the marketplace. And you put those two together and you take that as competition to those people, you're going to win. Because the people that you have that are creating these ideas and putting their effort and time and love into this, those are the people who are going to eventually, even if not in the beginning, create. They'll beat a team of 100 people working on the same problem, uh, because they're going to be able to see perspectives in that problem that the team of 100 people working for a paycheck who are still, worried about their bottom line and all these other things, they won't have the proper perspective to view these. Now, is this going to happen every time? Is it going to happen, instantly? No. But over time, in a marketplace of ideas, which is what the free market essentially is, the people who have more ability to spend their personal resources, their freedom, their will, their passion, their love on their ideas where they will directly benefit are gonna kick the shit out of people who are working for one dude on top of a mountain. And anybody who
Yeah.
disagrees with that, I don't know what to tell you, but you don't know people.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like, as soon as you said that, I began thinking, how has it affected my life? And the moment I began becoming my own person, the moment I began believing in myself, loving myself, and being like, I'm going to build this thing, all of a sudden my consumption of other people's ideas kind of fell away. Not ideas that I'm interested with other people, but
Right.
the
The
ideas that
idea
were
of
trying to
how you
penetrate
should.
me. Yeah.
Right. Hmm.
Yes. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I got 25 things of my own that I have to do that I really want to do. I don't have time to consume this person's attempt to persuade me.
Hmm.
So yeah, that does make sense. And I I feel that I am much more aware of and passionate of and enthralled with these dreams and ideas that I have versus my job where I have to find ways to be stoked about it, by whether it's seeing a
Hmm.
kid or creating my own thing at this other person's work, like.
Right.
So yeah, that
And
does make a lot of sense.
and even like seeing the kid and having an interaction with the kid is, in a few places in the country, pretty sketchy proposition.
Yep.
I mean, and even your ability to create a better situation for yourself is under scrutiny, which is, it's wildly incapacitating to people. It's like, I, I have some business down in Mexico, some manufacturing stuff, and my business partner, he goes, you know, you just go down to Mexico and you want something done, and you talk to the guy, and it gets done. As long as you're talking to the right guy.
Yeah.
Whereas here you have to go to this organization, get this stamp, send in this paperwork, have this proper, get them their account information and, verification and regulations and all these things. And by the end of the day, you're like, what was I doing?
Yeah.
Oh man. So, those barriers to entry, right?
Right.
They become profit centers for some people, but they become a depletion of resources for the creative and the enthusiastic and the actionable people of society. And they do that, and then they create a very narrow path that if you follow this path, you can actually bring it to market. By the way, this VC firm needs 20% equity because in order to bring this to market, we're going to need about $1 million. And that's how it goes. You see, and every single step becomes a compromise.
Wow, there's a lot there. Every single step becomes a compromise. Is that only true in the system we have, or do you think that that's true in everything?
Yeah. That's a hard question to just off the top of the head. I would say it's certainly true in the system we have,
Yes, without a
or
doubt.
at least relatively true. Um, you know, I think there's always, whenever you're going to have an interaction with other people, there's always going to be some form of compromise. Uh, because we're trying to have a conversation and agree in ideas. So, you know, my ability to communicate, the evidence that I have versus what you have and your ability to communicate, there's going to be a compromise there. Compromise doesn't always and isn't always a negative thing. Sometimes
Right,
those
right,
compromises
right.
allow us to enlighten ourselves.
Yeah.
However, I would say that the compromise that is inherent in today's society rarely, if ever, serves to have any sort of beneficial outcome to the individual.
Yeah, that is. I was just thinking the same thing. In our society, the word compromise has a negative connotation because it means, oh, well, you can do that, but I want this from you. I want this from you.
Exactly.
Where you
Right.
and I can have a compromise that's synergistic and we're building something together. It's not like we're
Hmm.
compromising. I mean, we are, but it's
We are.
not like it has a negative compromise. It's more of like
Mhm.
a positive building with each other to make our ideas better. So
Right.
yeah.
So in that context, I would say, yeah, yes, probably in all forms of iterations of society, you're gonna end up with a compromising situation. The context and the nature of that compromisity, I think, is a very, very uh, wide spectrum of positive and negative.
That I had something written down too because it just reminded me about. Oh yeah, okay, so it's on truth. And in your book, you say in order to actually know if something was true, you would have to have access to all the information that ever existed. Anything less is a guess. Even if that guess seems to be consistent, the only real verification would be to compare that guess to all information. And so it brings me back to this idea of truth, and
Mhm.
truth for the people on the top in our system is a lot different than our truth on the bottom. And
Mhm.
so how could the system we're talking about be a better truth? I know it's a kind of a complicated question, but does that kind of make sense? Like with truth,
Sure,
okay.
sure. Yeah, truth is relative in that sense. Now, you're going to have a lot of relative truths, and I think this is what you're getting to, that, seem pretty consistent. Um, and then when you have this type of society, those relative truths from the top down are, people must be governed, are, these ideas that, ignorance is not applicable to the law.
Yep.
Things like these truths are relative, that they're top down, and when they impact people, people get typically have a negative emotional response to these types of truths.
Right.
Uh, we could probably dissect that a little bit, but in this other model of society, the truths aren't going to be coming from a point of authority. These relative truths are going to be the relative truths of our elementary school kids who had a great idea.
Yeah.
Those are because the ideas are the heroes that are being talked about and discussed, and you know moving forward in society, as opposed to a guy or a girl, or whoever can make people emotionally riled up, or get on the most TV shows or YouTube shows. uh, I think the types of relative truths that come out of that model are going to much more positively impact people than what we see today.
Did you say the ideas are going to be the heroes?
Yes.
I can you just expand on that a little bit more? I really like the way that sounds.
So, I mean, the ideas, uh, historically speaking, are always the heroes, right? Yeah, we have the stories about, people or whatnot, but it's the ideas that are either villainized or, are the heroes of history. Likewise, I think from a societal perspective, if we were to remove personal experience out of it and just look down, it's the ideas of a society that are up for discussion, and it's the ideas that move forward a society. And if you have bad ideas or bad discussion around said, even good ideas, then the movement of the society is going to follow that track. Whereas if the ideas are the heroes, and those are what are uh, identified, and what people, that's the dinner conversation, as opposed to, you know all the bad things we could say. It creates a different dichotomy. It creates a different relationship between the people as an individual and the community. uh, so I think it would be, significantly different, uh, if our society was, much more, even though we do it on a, we do it kind of in the background. I think if the idea was the hero, and it wasn't attached to an individual, it wasn't attached to a company, it wasn't attached to a chunk of money, now all of a sudden we're talking about things that actually improve the whole community, the whole society. We're not talking about the dude who we think is going to do it.
Yeah.
And and another point on that, everybody should be the hero in their own story.
Yes, absolutely.
And if, you're the hero in your own story, then the group of stories becomes the idea. The group of people, of all those heroes, putting together their experiences and their tribulations and all of these things, will foment the ideas that move society forward.
I really like that. I've never heard that before. I've never heard ideas are the heroes, and it opens up so much more. Like, everybody can participate in an idea, and
Hmm.
ideas don't have to be, well, you can't be part of my idea. But if you're just one person, it's so limiting. But if you're part of an idea, it's like you get
Hmm.
to be part of the solution, and you're not excluded from being the one person that can make it happen. And that seems like a bad idea. One person being in charge of everything. That doesn't seem like a very heroic idea.
Or tribes being in charge of something too.
Yeah, yeah.
It takes the motivation, or the predication, towards tribalism, and shifts it towards idealism. Really, if we're focused on the ideas, then that's all we're discussing. We're reasoning about it. We're discussing the logic. We're discussing the implementation, the systems at play, all of these things when we're talking about ideas. If we're talking about a person, a group of these things, the ideas are not part of that conversation. We're talking about potentially their ideas and how it emotionally impacts us, but it's not a discussion about how these ideas can be a better thing to society. And if it is, in today's landscape, it's hurrah, this is perfect, nothing can be wrong with it because it came from this dude or this girl. And there's inherent problems in that. I think, you don't have to put on reading glasses to see it. It's pretty prevalent
It
everywhere you
really is.
look. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I really like the idea. I really like the idea of the system that we spoke about earlier. And I'm looking forward to next week when we can maybe discuss a little bit more about what that is. Maybe we can
Sure.
dive into the paper and get some get some more information there and talk more about their ideas. I got to get ready to go drive a
All
truck
right,
and
brother.
maybe see a 4-year-old kid that'll change my day for the. This is so much fun, Benjamin. I really enjoyed it, and I think we got to get
Me
into
too,
some
John.
really good ideas about it. So, tell people where they can meet you and where they can find you, and they can learn more about some of your ideas.
As always, benjamincgeorge.com. And you can also tune in next week on Wednesday
Yes.
for another episode of George and George.
Yeah, absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining. Anthony, thanks for chiming in and
Thanks,
talking
Anthony.
to us. And that's it for this week, ladies and gentlemen. We will be back next week. Thank you for your time. I hope you have a great day. And I'm going to try not to hang up on you after I do this part right here, Benjamin. So hang
Sounds
on
good.
1 second.
All
Okay.
right.
Aloha, everybody.